Welcome to episode 11 of season 2 of Calm Down with James Eade. And Calm Down with James Eade is not a command. It's not anything but an invitation to learn the tools and techniques that I have learned and that have been taught to me to help myself calm down. Because I struggled with anxiety. I was a material success in the world, and outside looking in, it looked like everything was great. Suit and tie to work, drove a good car, lived in a good neighborhood, that kind of thing. But I was struggling with an anxiety that I didn't know how to deal with except for by self-medicating. And by self-medicating, it led me to a gradual slump into addiction. It wasn't obvious at first, but over time it became more and more obvious. And eventually I knelt. I knelt, bent the knee to the tyrant of addiction. But this is also a story of recovery. And I've documented it in this book, Freedom, Your Path to Recovery, because I can't tell you how to recover. It's your path to find. You have to walk it, but you can walk it with your head held high, looking people in the eye. When I was in the throes of addiction, I couldn't do that, but I can now. And every human being has the power and potential to recover. I also have a book that's coming out, No Blame, No Shame, because there's no one else to blame for my addiction but me. And if you're pointing your finger at others, there are other fingers pointing back at yourself. So take responsibility for your own actions. Don't blame anyone else. And don't be ashamed. Addiction is a scourge throughout this country. Most families have been affected by it one way or the other. It's time for us to not be judging others and not being ashamed for things like falling into the addictions. It's supporting people who have. That's the key. And I have found that it's a community of people that have gone through something similar to you. It doesn't have to be identical, just similar. And they know, they can understand. They start nodding their heads after you say a dozen words. When other people who haven't been through what you've been through, you can say 1,000 words to them and they won't understand. So find a community of people that can support you. This is essential. And I think that all of us can find that. And it doesn't matter what community it is, because there are many that are out there. So this show is called Calm Down with James Eade. And if you want to see it prior editions, season 1, season 2, all of the other episodes, visit this website, airu.tv, Addicts in Recovery United. That's what it stands for. And if you want to write to us and tell us something, something to concentrate on, some other guests to have on, something to just want to get off your mind. info@airu.tv. And we can refer you to something. There is Buddhist-based, yogic-based, Christian-based. There's many types. There's non-theistic types of recovery programs that are out there that can help you. And you can find the freedom that I have found. And it's a wonderful thing. It's a gift I give to myself every morning. Now, we're going to go into other segments of the show. And the first segment is going to be about the types of things that aggravate us, that can get us off kilter, that can make us needed, necessary to calm ourselves down. The first key is awareness. You have to be aware that you're agitated. Like, why are my shoulders around my ears all of a sudden? That's the kind of thing when my body tenses. When I stop breathing, when I hold my breath, I'm tense. These are the keys my body can signal to me. And you learn the ones that do it for you. And when you become aware, you can't come up with the tools and techniques on your own immediately. And that's a recipe for disaster. It's a recipe for not being able to calm down. But if you know the things in advance, then you can use them when you are aggravated, when you're anxious, when you're not working out of your frontal lobes, but in your back of your neck and your amygdala. That's the time when you really need to calm down. This is a segment of our show that we dedicate to the gripes that can get us going, can alter our state of well-being, and can make us anxious, agitated, or angry. And then we look at what we can do about that. But I have a senior gripe correspondent, Rick Rosner from LA. Hi, Rick. How are you today?
Hey, all right. So my wife's trying to sleep, so I'm going to
Okay.
talk really softly, and I don't have my contact lenses in, so I have to get really close. So
Okay.
it,
Does this
it's
make you
all
feel
kind of
better?
it's even creepier like this, right? Yeah. So I'm going to start with somebody else's gripe. Back
Okay.
in the '80s, when I was a young man, I bounced bars, and my girlfriend was also a bouncer. And she was a better at the bouncing part than I was. She was strong, she was a dancer, she could move, and she could take people down. And
Ooh.
often, sometimes repeatedly, because she'd take somebody down, a drunk who was, fighting or doing something, and she'd take them down, and then they'd look around and they'd see they'd been taken down by a girl, and they were like, and then they'd get back up because that was not, it didn't, and then she'd take them down again. But she did not like cute blonde girls. So
Oh,
she she'd
good.
gone to, okay, so she'd gone to high school in Corvallis, Oregon, and she had friends. She was on the dance team.
Mhm.
Um, then her parents did the inexcusable thing for a high school kid. They moved her in her senior year,
Ouch.
uprooted her because her dad was an engineer and he had to move from job to job. They moved her to Gainesville, Florida, which is a trashier town than Corvallis. And she's new at the school and she wasn't on any team. And she had to fight other girls. And
Oh,
her high school experience was ruined. And so she had a deep like loathing for cute blonde girls coming into the bar where we were checking their IDs who you might have been cheerleaders in high school. She just hated like people who were popular in high school, even though this was now years after high school. And occasionally she'd even growl a little bit under her. So
definitely a sign, a canine sign that
oh yeah, there's a movie coming out called Night Bitch, which is about a Amy Adams. I think she got a Golden Globe nomination for the frustrations of her life make her think she's when she might be turning into a dog. Night Bitch, but there was no. I don't know if my ex-girlfriend ever got happier. She had a lot of testosterone. Like some people naturally have testosterone. I've met guys and like
yeah,
it's not always the best thing to have a ton of testosterone.
or yeah, that's for sure. Now there was a couple movies that popped into mind, Mean Girls and was it Heathers? You remember
Yeah,
those movies?
yes. And those were all about they were attacking the system of, of popular girls like having too much power at their high school.
Right. Yeah, that's a cinematic theme, um, and it makes me feel sorry for the popular girls in a way that they're so resented. But during those days, of course, they were, um, there was no reason to feel sorry for them because they were the ones
Well,
making
well,
their suffer.
in junior high, I hated the jocks. Oh, my nerdy friends and I called them Mike, Pat, Greg, and George because they were the four guys who dominated our PE class, and they were, cool, and we weren't.
Right.
Yet 5 years later, 8 years later, when I, become less nerdy and was starting to like date girls, I turned to those same jocks for advice because some of them turned out, probably most of them turned out, because most people aren't jerks, turned out not to be jerks. And they knew more shit about relationships than I did because when they were popular in junior high, so they had years and years more experience than I did.
Yes. It's funny
Like,
because the head cheerleader that in my high school, I'm still friends with her today, and she corrects my perceptions of what was going on in high school so
Yeah, but
often.
it turns out if you talk to people,
Yeah.
the people you think you wanted to be in high school, it turns out they were miserable too. Nobody is particularly happy in high school.
Mhm. And even the nerdy people have as much happiness and suffering. It's the
And
same.
the boundaries, the fences around the societal, like high school was created. It's an American invention. The comprehensive high school where everybody goes to school together, everybody studies, with it's designed to give you like an abridged version of adult American life circa 1920, 1930. And it was kind of when we were in school in the 70s, it was still kind of self-contained. But now the world via social media has blown open the doors, and so you're not limited to your high school in terms of looking for friends and stuff, but it's also,
The
it's probably
bullying. Yeah.
it's you lose the protection of being in a small, my high school was 2,000 people, which is big, but that's still smaller than the world. But now the world is on your back, even in high school, all the frickin' time.
Yeah. It's interesting because there are the cliques that form in high school, but also nowadays, and you and I didn't have to deal with this, there's a social bullying.
Well, yeah, but now we have two big cliques. We have the libs and the MAGAs,
Mm.
and they are constantly, if you're on social media, like trying to f up each other.
Yeah, yeah. And you participate in that, Rick?
Yeah, I do. I believe yeah. But now, so that was a mini gripe. Now let me go to my main gripe. The
Okay.
biggest, is this the season finale?
No, next week.
Oh, okay. Well, just do part one of it. Maybe
Okay.
it might slop over so.
I don't
In
know if we like sloppy grapes, but go ahead.
Okay, so in 1999, a popular British game show came to the US. It was Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? A show
Yeah,
where you could enter by calling up,
I
and
remember
this
that.
was like nobody had this is like almost a decade before the smartphone. You just took your regular, home phone, and you answered trivia questions by pressing numbers on your phone. And I'm
Those are the dial tones, or you
no,
actually
no,
no.
we had
We gotten to that stage. Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, all right.
So I was crazy. I just wanted to enter like crazy because I'm a trivia guy. I'm a
Yeah.
game. I've written for game shows. I've been on quiz shows.
Uh-huh.
So I entered, and um, if you did well enough in round one, if you got, I think they asked you 4 questions, and if you answered them fast enough, you got a second phone number to call at a certain time. You had a 1 hour window, and like
Excitement building. Yeah. Yeah.
so I called the time comes, and if you do well enough calling on the second number, you get to go to New York and be on the show. So the time comes, I call the second number. No such number. I call it again and again, and that number doesn't work. So I'm like, maybe they fucked up. And so it was an 800 number. So I try an 888 number, which is it worked. They'd
Ah,
given us the wrong number. And because
this was a
only
test. Yeah.
it wasn't a test. They were just,
They messed up. Yeah.
it was a fuck up. But because only the people from now in some states you had to pay to play. It was like $1. In some states it was free. And in the free states, they gave the wrong number. So only a few people from the states that didn't have to pay to play made it to the show, because only a few people figured out to try calling alternate versions of the number. Like out of, I don't know, the first 100 people who were on the show, maybe 2 were from the
States that had to pay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So I
So
made
you
it.
were one of those.
Yeah.
All right.
And I made it to the show. And
Yeah.
then I made it to the fastest finger round. I mean, you do the fastest finger round to see who gets to go to the center to play for money. And they said, put these Woody Allen movies in order of
Release.
when they were, yeah. And so I thought I did it pretty fast. Um, but Regis misread one of the things. But you can't listen to him anyway. You have to look at your screen. If you wait for him to finish reading, you're going to be too
You're
slow.
late. Right.
But they threw out the question because he misread it. And I think I would have gotten into the center on that because in talking to the other people in the circle, only a couple of us got the order right. And I had so anyway, so I didn't make the center. But I played the game again when it came back like 10 months later and got on the show again. And this time I won a fastest finger and I went crazy. I was like flexing and yelling and like a gorilla. And there was some technical issue with that question too. And where maybe because somebody had been, you get a little console in front of you, and some person had been nervously, one of the 10 people had been nervously fiddling with her console and hit a button that like put a box up in front of her question so she couldn't play that one. So they were thinking about throwing that question out too, but because my reaction, I'd gone so insane, they decided to keep the moment and bring the lady with the blocked screen back another time. So this was a show of glitches. In fact, when had been during the orientation, when the executive producer of the show talked to us and told us, how it worked and took questions from the contestant pool, there had been some questions that they had gotten factually wrong, where like either which of these Great Lakes is such and such, they had the wrong answer, the person got invited back. This had happened by then maybe half a dozen times. And so somebody asked, and one had just happened a couple of weeks previous, and somebody said, what if we get a bad question like that? And the executive producer, Michael, says, that's not your job to worry about. Your job is to try to come up with the correct answer. And it's our job to make sure that the questions are correct. And if we screw up, we will make it right. So I make it into the center, and I'm doing okay, because you always do okay. The first half dozen questions are pretty easy. And then we run out of time, and I'm going to come back in like 10 days because it's the 4th of July break. Mm-hmm. And we go to Disney World, and I've torn an almanac into pieces because the almanac's thick.
Yes.
I tore it into 5 chunks so I could always have a little chunk with me while we're waiting in line for the rides to study. Maybe I'll run into a fact that'll help me. And so I get back to New York. I'm back in the hot seat. And for $16,000, Regis asks me, what capital city is located at the highest altitude above sea level? And they had 4 cities. They had Bogota, Colombia, Mexico City, Quito, Ecuador, and Kathmandu, Nepal. And this was a brutal question,
right?
For 16 grand, which they weren't trying to screw me. It was just bad quality control. I found out later they'd asked a similar question: which of these state capitals is at the highest altitude, for 32 grand, and the person had got it wrong. And so that was an indication that because they don't want people to get necessarily questions wrong at that level. I mean, Jay Leno, no, Trebek had made fun of how easy the questions were. And he made fun of a $16,000 question, which was, which snack chip has the slogan, "Eat all you want, we'll make more," which was totally easy because there were, everybody knew it was Doritos. But I got this national capital question. I'm like, And I sat in that chair for 22 minutes trying to figure it out. And I used my phone a friend, finally decided that the trick to the question, the secret logic of the question was, it had to be Kathmandu. Because I knew a little bit. I knew Mexico City was at 7,340 feet above sea level, I think, which is pretty high, well over a mile. But I thought my phone friend and my phone friend had been to 3 of the cities. He was a travel writer. And we agreed it was probably Kathmandu, because Kathmandu is only like 70 miles from the highest point on Earth, the summit of Mount Everest.
Right. That would have been my gut answer.
Right. At 29,000 feet. So I'm not happy with my, but I say Kathmandu, and it's wrong. It's Quito.
Okay.
And then, so I leave with $1,000, which, bummed me out. And then within a week or so, somebody told me, I don't remember who, you should look up those cities. And I found out that the correct answer to the question was not any of those cities. It's La Paz, Bolivia, which is 4 kilometers or roughly above sea level, compared to Quito, which they said was 8,800 feet above. La Paz, Bolivia, one of 2 capitals of Bolivia. Some countries have more than one capital. So La Paz is like much of it is more than 12,000 feet above sea level. Like, people get sick just going there.
Right.
So then I write to Millionaire, and I'm like, hey, I go, hey, I just found this out, and this looks like a flawed question, and all right, this is a flawed. You left out, and so what can we do about this? And I know what they could do when they have a factually flawed question. They have the contestant back.
Right.
So this seemed clearly like that, and they wrote back and said, no, or maybe eventually got on the phone with them. I don't know. They said, well, no, your job there was to pick the highest of the 4 cities we gave you. And I said, no, it isn't. Not the way the question was phrased, and also not according to standard quiz show practice, because I'd written for quiz shows, and quiz shows generally ask about the number one thing. Certainly at that level of the game, they thought they had the number one highest capital, Quito, because in the World Almanac, there was a list of world cities, very incomplete. There are tens of thousands of cities in the world. This was a list of the altitudes of 30 cities. And the guy who wrote the question thought, oh, well, these must be the highest altitude cities, even though there was no indication of that. And Quito was the highest altitude city on that list. And I was a millimeter away from getting that question right, because I had the almanac. But where I tore the almanac put that list on the last page of a chunk, and I never got to that page. But that list was wildly incomplete and flawed. And so I argued with them for months. And to make my point, I eventually, Millionaire was one of the, maybe the most successful TV show internationally ever. It was on in dozens of countries.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew what the question meant, and I knew they were bullshitting me, that they thought they had the highest city.
Right.
And I looked at I learned enough words in enough foreign languages that I could look at 110,000 different "Who Wants to Be a Millionaire" questions from dozens of countries to show that just about every time they asked a question like that, phrased like that, they were wanting the number one thing.
Right.
You know, it, if they asked which of these men was the first president of the United States, they would have to include George Washington. It was phrased like that.
Right.
And they kept saying no. And partly it was they'd been caught being wrong so many times, they were getting sick of it.
Mm.
And partly was that they had inexperienced question writers, because Regis Philbin is in New York and everybody who writes on quiz shows is in LA. So they had to hire rookies. So mistakes were made, even on established shows like Jeopardy. They make mistakes, but Millionaire, if you get a mistake, you're done. You're kicked out of the hot seat. On Jeopardy, there's a mistake. They go to break, and after the break, they say we've adjusted the scoring because it turns out there was a second answer to this. I just saw one of those last week. So this goes on for a long time, and I'm obsessed with it, and I'm pissed.
Okay.
So I sued him. So should we stop there? We're at 22 minutes.
Yes, I think so. And we'll talk about the obsession, and what we can do when we become obsessed with something. I have somebody that I'm working with right now who can't let go of something, and I don't know what else to tell them. So maybe we'll pick up there. Like, how do you deal with something like that?
Okay.
And if you can, and how do you let go of something that's driving you nuts, and you're putting way too much time and effort into something that is costing you more and not getting you what you want.
You know who couldn't let go of something just is whoever shot the United Health CEO. That's a guy, I mean, who probably had some, we don't know who it is yet, but that's a guy who probably had a deep wound, and obviously one that he couldn't let
Right.
go. Way more serious than getting a fucked up quiz show question.
Right. Well, Rick, thank you. And if you ever get in touch with your ex-girlfriend, see how she's doing. Would be interested in knowing how she's dealt with her dislike for popular, cute.
I mean, she doesn't have any internet footprint, which is weird at this. Like, I'm hoping that her funk didn't take her away from life.
Yes, and that's one of the things that we're trying to do here, because often you run into people and then you never hear from them again, and you end up thinking, well, what could I have done? Could I have reached out? Could I have? And you don't know the difference between interfering and intervening sometimes in people's lives. It's a very complicated question, and we'll take it up in our season finale, which is coming up in 1 week. And I hope to see you then, Rick.
All right, see you then.
It's essential to the show. Thank you very much. Bye-bye. Okay, that was our gripe segment of the show. And stay tuned for a yoga instructor, Yudhishthira, will come on and help us learn the tools and techniques for us to keep ourselves calm. Because the key to this show and to my life in general now is finding ways to calm down. Hi. This is the segment of Calm Down with James Eade that we talk to a yoga therapist, a yoga teacher, and learn some of the techniques and tools to how we can calm ourselves down when agitated. Because inevitably we will become agitated at some point. And we've been going through the chakras, and this will be the sixth chakra, the spiritual eye, from what I understand. And I'm going to get some backup here. Is that correct, Yudhishthira? Are we talking?
You are absolutely correct, Jim.
I cheated a little bit and asked you beforehand, but
Well, your short-term memory is working just fine. So
thank you. It's good to have that validation. So okay, the spiritual eye, the chakra is between the eyebrows, a little above, or
it is. We talk about it in shorthand. We talk about PBE, the point between the eyebrows. And I it's again helpful to back up a little bit. I just got done, teaching a physical yoga class,
okay,
and for most of the world, the physical yoga postures are yoga.
right. That was
And
certainly
that is,
my understanding before I got deeper into
yeah,
it.
and it is not wrong in the sense that the yoga postures, when properly done, can lead one through the entirety of the path of yoga. But I have met many yoga teachers out in the world who went and got a training and had no understanding of what chakras were, no understanding of the Bhagavad Gita or the history behind
Right.
yoga, and it's because they were only trained in an exercise regime,
Right.
and they were taught how to safely teach people how to do those exercises. Hopefully, they were taught that. And but here's the interesting thing: I've also watched some of those people who had no original training in the bigger expanse of yoga, which is quite honestly, the asana part is just a sliver
Right.
of yoga. But I've watched so many people through the physical practice of yoga end up having something awaken within them that becomes curious.
Yes.
Like, what is this energy I feel?
Yes.
Why do I want to be still instead of continue moving? So the postures have great power, and I don't want to minimize them.
Right.
Within the yoga world that I'm part of, the yoga postures are relegated to, again, a relatively small part of the practice, but nonetheless, they're acknowledged as having that potential to lead us to an awareness beyond the sense of the body and the material world.
Right.
And Ananda Yoga certainly does that. So that when we're talking about, when you and I come together, as we've been doing, this is what, the 11th in this.
Episode 11, season 2.
Yeah.
Yes.
When we talk about these things, or last season when we talked about yamas and niyamas, we're talking about the more fulsome reality of what is yoga.
Right.
What was yoga always intended to be? The teachings of yoga were, to a large degree, always conveyed as an oral tradition. That is to say, they were conveyed from a guru to the guru's disciples.
Yes.
And I say disciples on purpose because, it's not always one guru and one disciple. It oftentimes, like in the case of Jesus, he had 12 disciples. And
Right.
from a yoga standpoint, Jesus was teaching pure yoga.
Right.
And it's not hard to see. But he was only one of many. I have a friend who's Muslim, and one of the things I appreciate about the Muslims is that they were able to expand to include prophets from all paths. And so it is within yoga is that we look at the practice of yoga as having come down through the ages. But there came a point when that oral tradition, where the ability for people to retain that information became less possible, less likely, this goes into what are called the yuga cycles and where the planet was in its rotation throughout the galaxy. And this gets very cosmic, I realize, but what it ends up meaning is that what we think of as the advancement in civilization, that is the ability to go to writing, to the written word, was actually just the opposite. That it was the loss of the ability to convey the truth. And we all know that written words and spoken words are only approximations of what they are pointing to. So it's become far less exact.
Language is inherently ambiguous. So
Absolutely. And English is like as nearly as I can tell, is like the epitome of ambiguity. We have so many, and it makes it fun. It's absolutely a fun language, and we get lots of phrases that, and those phrases sometimes actually do a great job of sort of encapsulating an experience.
Right.
And I mean, things like, don't burn the barn down to let the horses out.
Right.
All right.
I'd never heard that one, but go ahead.
Well, there's
I had heard that.
a simple little bit of truth,
Yeah.
About life.
Right.
And so my point is this, is that yoga carries with it a vibration from a higher age that we are all capable of achieving. And so much of yoga has been co-opted by popular society, to the point that it actually has become the sort of, in some ways, a little bit of a joke, in terms of the chakras, for example, or the spiritual eye, or there's it's almost a meme in certain
Yes.
TV shows and movies to show someone sitting attempting to meditate,
Right.
as if they are somehow like trying to avoid reality.
Right.
And so there's very little that moves us in the direction of the truth of what yoga is. And I'm so grateful for this path of yoga, Ananda, which is the complete package of yoga. And when we talk about the chakras in particular, there you have something that has been, again, sort of adopted in popular culture. And when it comes to the point between the eyebrows, this is one that has become sort of, it epitomizes that outward co-option of the deeper truths of yoga, trying to make it somewhat less. It's like the yoga postures. There's so much more,
Right.
than simply exercises. And the same is true of these chakras. And then there's also this tendency, even when people are allowing themselves to say, okay, there's something worthwhile here, it ends up getting related back to the physical body. And it's true that in the human brain, that we have the prefrontal cortex. We have a particular gland that's there as well. And oftentimes people want to go to that physical thing and explore it and think they're going to come out with the truth.
Right.
And it's just missing the point.
Right.
All right, which is that physical part of our brain exists because of this particular energy center that's here. That everything that is built has some sort of a plan, and these days those plans end up coming out in the form of computer generated uh, uh, um,
Images.
yeah, I mean, there's a word I'm not quite grabbing onto, but they are computer generated images of what is not a physical thing yet.
Right.
But we accept the fact that, oh, there's this pattern here, and I can build a building out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And because of the fact I have all the dimensions, I have all the angles, I have all the parts, and so it is with us. And when it comes to the spiritual eye, it is so helpful to understand that what this is physically is a manifestation of an energy pattern, a blueprint that's already there. And so it's true, that when we begin to put our attention, Yogananda, my guru, would oftentimes tell people, if you want to do just one thing, put your attention to the point between the eyebrows as you move throughout the day.
Wow.
Now, how easy is that to say? And how hard is it to do?
Yes.
Yeah.
Such as the case so often.
Yeah.
Now, you're
ahead.
also saying, if I'm correct, the spiritual eye is not external, or is it, as well as internal?
Well, here's the thing about spiritual eye, is that it has a predictable, viewable image that can be translated into a physical image. I didn't share it with you. I wish I'd thought to do it. Maybe next week we will.
Sure.
But there is a representation of what is seen in the spiritual eye. Let's go back and talk about each of the chakras just a little bit and say that each one of them has a characteristic sound, not one that we hear with our physical ears, but if you're deep in meditation, deep in stillness, and you begin to hear sounds, the sounds that you hear are usually the sounds of the chakras.
Mm-hmm.
Either one or several, or when it comes to the point between the eyebrows, the sound of Om. Not someone going Om. We do that in order to attune ourselves outwardly to what is a deeper sound. You've probably, being who you probably are aware that there are recordings of the sounds of space.
Yes.
And it's so interesting when you hear those recordings that you get this deep tone.
Yes.
So when I am still enough in meditation, which I want to be completely above board here and say it does not happen all the time.
Sure. Right.
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 But when I do go deep in meditation, I've heard the sound of Om, and so I know it's real. I mentioned a few weeks ago a student, because I teach science as well in the classroom, and I had a student at one point really questioned me at one point about something I'd said that related the outward world to the inner world, which is say, as you end up moving more energy around these and through these chakras, we can feel that energy increase in an upward movement of energy. And it relates directly to an electromagnet or a motor, where if you wrap more coils around it, it has more power.
Right.
And he objected to that at first, but I pointed out to him that the same basic scientific method can be applied to the practice of yoga that is applied to material sciences. That is, you start with a question and you end up doing some research.
Mm-hmm.
The research is in the world of yoga comes from the great masters, from the gurus,
Mm-hmm.
people who've had the experiences and are saying, here's what you do, here's how you do it. Exactly what scientists have done for centuries now. If you want to know about the law of gases, you go back to Boyle and Lavoisier and people like that. And you end up with these basic laws of the way that gas works.
Right.
Well, you go to a guru and you learn the basic laws of how the energy world is assembled and how do we perceive it. And they say the sound of Om is the sound of creation. So that when we begin to put our attention to the point between the eyebrows and we relax into what we call meditation, I say what we call meditation because meditation is not the techniques that get you there.
Right.
Meditation is a natural condition of the human being, which has to do with awareness and nothing to do with physical form. And when we learn to relax into that state, and this is why the techniques of yoga are so powerful, they're no different than an experiment in the scientific world. A scientific experiment, in order to be valid, the data collected needs to be validated by peer review.
Right.
And that's exactly the way it works in yoga as well.
Right.
So for years, I was reading all this stuff, autobiography of a yogi. I took Raja yoga courses. I learned how to be a hatha yoga teacher. And I read the Bhagavad Gita, and I began to gather this body of information. And along the way, I was told over and over again that when you meditate successfully and you get very still, that you're going to see um, a particular image as if it's projected on the field of your awareness behind your forehead.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it's not literally projected there, of course, but it's amazing the similarities between a movie theater and what we see as the spiritual eye. My guru Yogananda used to take his disciples to the movies on purpose.
Mm-hmm.
He would let them get completely absorbed in the story. Then he would tap them on the shoulder and point up to the projector from which the sound and light emanated that created the complete illusion in which those people, his disciples, had gotten completely absorbed.
Yeah.
And
I wanted to ask you one other thing.
Yeah.
When I'm chanting Om and I'm feeling the connection, I'm thinking of it, I feel it as a cosmic constant that I'm connecting to. And this sound of Om seems like, you said it was an act of creation. It seems to me to be permeating the universe. And that's just one guy's feeling while doing it.
Well, and it sounds to me like you've gotten still enough to have had those experiences. I went through a period of time when I would, I'd been meditating for a long time,
mm-hmm.
and yet, the sound of Om had been not something that happened every time I meditated, and I got to this place where every time I would sit to meditate, I would hear the sound of Om, and my mind would immediately awaken and go, "Oh, you're hearing the sound of Om," and then of course it would stop.
Right.
Because awareness is essentially not the physical mind.
Mm-hmm.
Awareness is that thing that animates and enlivens, the neurons in our brains, but it's that energy behind it. And so the pattern, is, there's a sound and there's light. And the sound of Om, sometimes when you really get still, you do, like you were saying, you actually, it's not so much of a sound as it is, or it's as much of a sound as it is a feeling.
And the way I've conceptualized it is it's a cosmic vibration. I'm attuning to that.
Yeah, and this is where I love it that quantum physics has sort of arrived eventually in about 150 years, coming up and nudging up against what has been common knowledge within the teachings of yoga for thousands of years.
Right.
But it's great. I mean, I love them both.
I do too, and and I had that same realization that all of a sudden they're talking about quantum mechanics. It's like, oh my goodness. Well, energy and matter, waves.
There's a book out there by a friend named his name in the world is Joseph Selby, and he wrote a book called The Physics of God. And he's a brilliant guy. And the physics of God is again sort of exploring in depth this corresponding quantum physical reality that is relatively new, and the ancient teachings of yoga, which are relatively ancient. And so again, I'm using a lot of words, and we're talking about this, but really, it comes down to an experience,
right? And
the real challenge for most folks is that all of this becomes academic.
Yes. And until you have that, once you have that experience, you can't deny it. And it's one of those things that I won't say it caught me by surprise, but I would say that I didn't really believe it until I felt it.
And it's a reasonable place to come from.
Mhm.
That place of questioning,
Right.
like of doubt even.
Yes.
It's not a bad thing.
Right.
And however, the thing is that most people will not do the work needed
Right.
just as surely as most people are going to believe. It's so amazing to me. People take science and treat it like a religion. They'll take it on complete faith, what they're told. I probably mentioned to you last time the idea of the ninth planet.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
And so there are people out there who are completely take it on complete faith, who don't know even a fraction of the math needed or the computer generated modeling that goes into it to end up coming up with a reasonably intelligent prediction of something that otherwise they have no idea. But people will buy into that right away.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, when it comes to what happens if I put my attention to the point between the eyebrows? What happens if I get completely still? What happens if I begin to live my life from within the center of my being?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm aware of connecting to the earth through the first chakra. I'm aware of the great sense of creativity and sensuality, the wonderful blessings of fluidity of second chakra, of the willpower of chakra number 3, the strength of self-control. And when I come to the heart, rather than letting things just burst out in rage or anger or lust, I keep them focused and move them upward and bring them into a place of calmness at the point between the eyebrows. And then when it comes to the spiritual eye, it's important to remember that it has 2 poles: the medulla, which is the seat of the ego, and we bring all of those qualities up through the ego, and the ego comes along with it, which is important.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A key learning for me is the ego was not my amigo until I made it my ally. It was part of it. I integrated it. And
Yep.
this was because it was like, a lot of the teaching that I had before was about, the ego is a problem and not
Yep.
making it part of the solution. And
Well, and
it's
there
just part
is
of it. Oh, we're part of
there
it.
is no doubt that there are therapies and things that we can do in the outer world that are very beneficial.
Sure, of course. I didn't mean to disparage anything.
Well, no,
Right.
well, and you weren't. I mean, I didn't get that at all. I'm just saying that there's a tendency for people to say it's one or the other. And the fact is, there are really great things that happen in the regular world.
Mhm.
Talk therapy has value.
Absolutely.
Group therapy has value.
Yes.
And it's interesting that many of those therapists have realized drug therapy is valid. And there are plenty of times that I've worked with people as a yoga therapist and realized that, hey, maybe you ought to go back to your MD or your psychiatrist, and maybe you ought to actually be willing to listen to what they have to say and consider that the drugs that they're offering you will actually be a value, rather than resisting them and saying, no, I want to do this on my own.
Right.
Well, maybe you don't have the ability, to do it on your own. And in fact, for many people, they don't have the ability to sit down and suddenly hear the sound of Om and see the spiritual eye. That spiritual eye is easily drawn as a ring of gold, a field of blue, and a 5-pointed white star,
Mm-hmm.
1 point up, 2 points down, 2 points either side. That is I was told about that image long before I saw it.
Mm-hmm.
However, I was in a place where everything I had been told up until that point was true. And when I began to do the work myself, sure enough, I heard the sound of the chakras. I heard the sound of Om. I saw the spiritual eye. And I also kept getting distracted by the outer world. And so there's the work. There's a wonderful yogi out there, or he passed in I want to say the early 2000s, Swami Satchidananda. He was famous for a yoga style called integral yoga, and he was a real deal. He's just one of my. He's not my guru, but he's one of my favorite gurus.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are on Facebook and you come across posts from his folks, his teaching is very practical, and he talks about how easy it is to roll downhill,
Mm-hmm.
and how hard it is to climb up.
Mm-hmm.
And that is simply the reality that we find ourselves in. This takes work.
Right.
And the question becomes, really, and this is true of addiction as well, and you'll recognize this, have you suffered enough to be willing to do the work to find out what is permanent and true about who you are? And so that when we talk about these chakras, you can use words.
Yeah.
You can describe them. You can talk about their qualities. For example, the sixth chakra is the point between the eyebrows. It's called in Yogananda brought the teachings of Christianity and Hinduism together, not to propagate either religion, but to show that there is a common truth.
Right.
So this center is sometimes called the center of Christ consciousness,
Mm-hmm.
not Jesus consciousness, Christ consciousness. In Sanskrit, it's called Kutascha Chaitanya. And again, it comes out of the spiritual eye. It has a name as a chakra. It's called Ajna, which in Sanskrit comes out as Agya. And it is the medulla and the spiritual eye together. Mm-hmm. That's chakra number 6. Let's see. I wanted to tell you that when it is in balance, when we are working well here, it's attunement, cooperation, joy in what we're doing. When it's out of balance and we have too much energy here that is not properly focused, it ends up being too intellectual, coldly rational, things like that.
Sorry, Leonard Nimoy, but I'm thinking of Spock.
Yes, exactly. But he was on a learning curve, wasn't he?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And in terms of the planet, it is the sun. And so within yoga terms, there's a yoga posture where we are seated, legs straight forward, and we fold forward.
Right.
And the back of the body is wide open.
Right.
That is called Paschimottanasana, or west facing pose. And that's because you've come into the forward bend. And so you're orienting to this. This is the sun. This is the east. When we awaken in what's called self-realization, even in small degrees, we see light. Something goes on here.
Yes.
And when we are operating our best in the world, the front part of our brain is definitely active. There are some videos or some YouTube videos by a friend named, he's an MD up in Ananda Village, and he has done a lot of research on meditation in the brain. And I'm talking about the physical brain.
Right.
What happens? And so when people actually are successful at meditating, and by the way, many universities, including Stanford, have done corresponding studies as well. What happens when people are successfully meditating? What happens at the level of the brain functioning? And the rest of the brain tends to calm down, but the prefrontal lobe becomes more active.
Lights up, right?
Yeah. So you can get outward confirmations of this, but in the end, the sixth chakra is not something to be treated like, oh, I'm going to go there. Saying that you're going to put all your attention here all the time is like going to the gym after having been on the couch for 20 years and saying, I'm going to get strong in one day.
Right.
So it's
work that way.
it's helpful to begin to work, and spend time on each of these.
And how does this sound to you? Because it seems to me, my experience was curiosity wasn't enough. I was curious about the types of deeper yoga that you're speaking about, but I had to develop a passion as well. And at some point, I was just more than curious about learning these things, and that is what drove me into beyond my contempt prior to investigation and beyond my simple curiosity into this is something that I must know.
Yeah, you just pointed to something, Jim, that again, no word can really describe, but you pointed to it successfully, and I understand it. And I I compare it in to addiction. What changes when someone is ready to stop being an addict?
Right.
You cannot say, it was this moment or this moment or this moment. Something that is non-physical changes.
Yes.
And when that change takes place, sobriety is almost guaranteed. And from a yogic standpoint, um, that may happen at the point of leaving the body and may actually take place in a following lifetime where the addictions overcome earlier. Um, and so it is with the desire, you know, because of the program, that you have, and I'm hesitant to say the desire to know God, but I just said it. But
Mm-hmm.
that's really what it comes down to,
Right.
That I have this craving that cannot be satisfied, and I
Yes.
never used to have it.
Right.
I want to know, call it truth with a capital T if you like.
Yes. Yes.
There you go. I mean, that neutralizes things, so there's no sort of trigger on the word God, but
He's doing a little delicate step around my feelings.
yeah. Well, and
No. I totally agree with you. However, whatever works for you, don't use the language that I use. It doesn't
yeah.
matter. As long as you know what you're aiming at, however you describe it is perfectly okay with me.
Yes, and that ends up being the simple truth of it. And so, I think perhaps what we'll maybe you and I can talk about this, but for our final class next week, because we've come to the end of the chakra system.
Right.
But I thought we might actually, I've chanted at chakras before. I've used the harmonium. I actually have it here. I thought we might do it today. But next week we'll actually chant at the chakras
Okay.
and try to have an actual experience. And maybe I'll guide you into a short meditation with a simple technique you already know, but for your viewers that might be helpful. And anyway, I'm just thinking that the actual experience is what we're really looking for,
Yes.
not just me talking and saying, "Oh, this is, you know, this planet and this planet and this
Mm-hmm.
experience and this sound." All that's fine. I mean, I'm grateful to
Yes.
have the capacity to share some of
I
this
find it
information.
enlightening. So, but I also understand what you're saying about the meaning of the experience itself. How much more profound that is.
Yeah. So I think that maybe we'll wrap it up next week with
All right.
just that. Okay.
I look forward to it. Thank you
All right.
again,
All
and
right.
blessings to you until next week.
All right. Blessings, my friend.
Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.
Well, Yudhisthira was kind enough to share the sixth chakra, but if you want to be seeing other shows, go to airu.tv. It's scrolling across the bottom of your screen now. That's the website that contains this season and last season's all of the episodes. And if you want to write to us, you want to ask Yudhisthira a question, you may not know him, but I do. I can pass it on. info@airu.tv. So thank you again for joining us. And remember, what we're doing here, it's an invitation to calm down with James Eade. Welcome to the final segment of Calm Down. And I want to introduce to you, my loyal listeners and viewers, Divya Lovewise, that wise yogi. And I would like you, at the end of every show, I'm a little bit agitated and worked up and all that kind of stuff. And I was wondering if there's something that you could do to calm me down. Could you just say goodbye to us in any way that you see fit?
Sure, I would
Oh,
love to.
I will take off and let you do that. Thanks again.
Okay. Well, bring yourself into a comfortable seated position, feeling your feet on the floor and letting your hands rest in your lap. Palms up or palms down is a great way to start bringing yourself back into center and focus with your own divine energy and letting go of anything that might have wanted to stick to us throughout the day that may be energy we don't want to carry throughout the day. So, having this basic position, feeling grounded, even closing your eyes and taking a deep breath in through the nose and out through the mouth. And one of the ways we can bring ourselves back to center is observing with our senses what we can feel, the temperature of the air in the room, observing any sounds that you hear. Noticing any smells in the air. And then bring your awareness to your breath. As though you're watching it from the inside out. Watching the inhale wash into the body. And watching the exhale wash out of the body. Just like the waves of the ocean as they wash onto the shore. And if you find your mind still wandering, you can even place one hand on your lower belly and one hand on your heart so that you can feel with your hands this breath washing in and washing out. And with your mind's eye, visualize this inhalation and exhalation as an internal shower, clearing away your energy so that it's refreshed, it's rejuvenated, and it's restored. Releasing your hands into your lap, just give yourself a few seconds of pause in this return to peace, enjoying it. When you are ready, you can open your eyes, wiggling your fingers and your toes, feeling grounded in your body, grounded in the best part of yourself, and you can go out into the world and carry that best part in the forefront of your mind and your heart.